Welcome to Big Blend Radio with your hosts, Lisa and Nancy, editors of BigBlendMagazine.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to Big Blend Radio. Today, Pushcart winning author Nancy McCabe is joining us to talk about her new young adult novel. It's called Vaulting Through Time, and you can go to her website, nancymccabe.net, and it is out now, released July 25th, 2023. So welcome to the show, Nancy. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, it's great to have you. Now, did I get your last name correct as pronunciation? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Because I mess up everything, town names, people's names, and then they tell me, and then I mess it up right after I learned it, So anyway, it's good to have you here. This is exciting. You've been doing quite a bit of writing. So you do fiction and nonfiction, right?
I do. Yeah. I actually did most of my education in fiction. I did an MFA in fiction. I did a PhD with a creative dissertation, and then I kind of switched over for many years to writing creative nonfiction. So I've been coming back to fiction gradually here.
That's cool. Yeah, and you teach, don't you?
I do.
You speaking? Awesome.
Yes. I direct the writing program at a branch of the University of Pittsburgh, and I mentor as part of the Spalding Low Residency MFA program.
Wow, very cool, very cool.
Yeah.
And so going into writing young adult, that is something that is a little bit different than writing for adults, right? It's you got to get it right. Otherwise, it's like, all right, you're out.
Yeah, a little bit. I actually started out trying to write a middle grade novel many years ago when my daughter was the age that she was reading a lot of those. And I realized how different it is writing for a younger audience. And I worked with I took workshops and worked with editors, and they're like, voice is so important. And so it took me many years to get that manuscript. Like, I feel like it's actually coming out too in a couple of years. And I feel like I finally got that right. But then I felt much more prepared to try writing a young adult novel, where I don't think that, it's that different, except that the characters are younger and you're dealing more with themes that relate to things like identity and independence. Those tend to dominate in young adult fiction. But in many ways, I think that it's very similar to writing other kinds of fiction.
Yeah, it's coming of age and understanding what youth are going through,
Right.
Young adult time, that teenage years, it's so messy.
Yes, totally. Yeah.
It's messy, it's stressful. And then on one side, you're like, I know everything. And then you really don't, and deep down, you know it. But you know what I mean? We go through all of that.
For sure. And watching my daughter go through adolescence certainly brought back my own messiness. And like those years where everything just feels so intense and difficult. And it's such a relief when you kind of get through it and you become an adult and you realize that you can handle things and that,
Yeah,
hopefully. Hopefully.
Yeah. I was going to say, but your daughter seems to be an inspiration for a lot of your writing.
She has been, yeah. So I wrote a couple books about adoption when she was young because she's adopted from China. And so I wrote a memoir about adopting her. And then I wrote another book about returning to China to learn more about her origins and just the whole idea of homeland visits, which were, I don't know if they still are, but were very popular when she was young, to go back and try to reconnect to the child's roots. So I did a lot of nonfiction writing related to her, and I was kind of worried about it because the second book came out when she was 13, and that's like not the age that you want your mom to be writing a book about you. But she was always very gracious and very enthusiastic, and still is. But I anything I've written about her, I make sure that she reads or I read to her every word, and I get her input, and I make sure I'm not exposing her or saying anything that she objects to. So but she's surprisingly generous about letting me write what I write.
Cool.
Only once did she ever veto a piece of writing, but then definitely the main character in Vaulting Through Time is based on her, a little bit on me when I was that age too, but very much based on her. She was a gymnast, and she definitely had a lot of questions about identity and her place in the world. And so all of that is also true of this particular character, Elizabeth.
I love this because Elizabeth now she's got her friend Zach, right?
Yeah.
So that's a little, yeah, that's that messiness I talk about at a young adult. It's like, okay, are you my friend? Are you not?
Right.
All that. So they've got that going on, but at the same time, she's a gymnast and she's coming of age, right? Your body's changing. And so that made me kind of really think about that as a sports person, especially a gymnast, because you have to be so like a dancer. You have to be so lithe. Your weight has to do with things about how you manage, to do vaults and things like that. So that's an interesting, part of the story. But she does get into a time machine, and as soon as I saw a time machine, I'm like, oh, we got to have her on the show. We want to know. So I love that you have like the reality of what, adolescents are going through, but at the same time, you add this a time machine in there. It's fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really a realistic story with the magical elements.
Yeah, exactly. So do you want to give everyone a little overview of the story so that I don't tell the story? Tell everybody everything.
Yeah. So the main character is Elizabeth, and she is facing issues that all gymnasts face, especially gymnasts of all the different kinds of sports and movement activities. Gymnasts do better when they're younger and smaller. And so she's facing those changes in her body, and she really is terrified to throw herself over the vault. She doesn't want to do blind backward tumbling. Her gymnastics career is coming to an end, like happens with many, many kids.
Oh.
And so she thinks that that's her biggest problem, and the fact that she kind of has this crush on her ex-best friend, and she doesn't know what to do with that. And then she discovers that actually there are much bigger issues, that she is very close to her mom, but there is stuff that her mother has withheld from her about her origins. And so she and Zach discover that a watch that they found in an abandoned house many years before is actually a time machine, and that she could go back to the past to figure out the answers to these questions that her mother isn't answering. And so as a little experiment, they send her back to the week that the woman from the abandoned house disappeared. And she discovers this mysterious abandoned child and doesn't quite know what's going on there. She tries to return home, and the watch malfunctions, and she finds herself in 1988. She meets an elite gymnast who also seems to have some piece of the puzzle. She ends up traveling again to the 1920s, where she meets another mysterious person. So she meets these three people that seem to hold some key to her background. And just when she's kind of beginning to figure it out, a thief steals an identical time machine. And so she basically has to chase the thief through time, and the watch is set for many great moments in gymnastics history. So she finds herself at these moments, these Olympics, trying to figure out why this woman has stolen the watch and how she's going to stop her.
Cool.
And so much of the second half of the book is that journey to try to stop the thief and discover what piece that person has in her own background and origins. And so ultimately, it is a journey of growth and learning to value connections to family, to family ties, to discovering her identity. So she does solve the mystery, but it's a complicated process. And before she can fix the situation and solve the mystery, she finds that she has to go to the 1988 Olympic trials, and she has to stand in for another gymnast, and she has to do a vault. She's not an elite vaulter, and she has to do, and she's terrified to vault. She's had to do it to get through time. She wears the watch and she vaults, and she's always afraid she won't be able to do it. And so here she is at Olympic trials, and among all these amazing gymnasts, and she's got to perform a vault. And so,
that sounds like a crazy dream.
Yeah,
those dreams, you know what I mean?
It does. Yeah.
It's like one of those dreams where you have like all of a sudden it's like, when you're having to face your fears, those dreams,
Right. Exactly.
we have those, and where, it's like you have to hug the monster.
Yeah. And she
Mhm.
does often feel in her travels through time that it's sort of like those dreams where you appear in public in your nightgown or your underwear
Yeah,
or
yeah.
whatever, because
And then all of a sudden you're able to like, walk across water, jump, fly, do all
right.
these
Yeah.
things.
Bye. Yeah.
Vault, that's awesome though. But I love that you're going through a time machine because it adds in this element of history. So it must have been fun to do some of the research on this and then also add that in a way for those who are reading for, to kind of connect to history in a way and then to also learn about, what a good mystery is and to problem solve.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is kind of a hybrid of genres because it is a mystery and it is historical and it is
Cool.
contemporary. I mean, it kind of melds all those things. But yeah, the research was a lot of fun because I had to do research about a lot of it takes place in my own town of Bradford, Pennsylvania, in
Okay, cool.
various time periods. So I had to do research about what this place was like in these different times. I did a lot of research about gymnastics and about Olympics history. Yeah, all of that was really fun, and just picking out moments that she would end up at and that would somehow impact her to witness them.
That's, super cool. I think time machines, it just opens up the door to creativity. Do you think that they actually exist? Like seriously? Because there
um,
is that vibe that I feel that there's got I always believe that I just don't I think we shouldn't limit ourselves.
so yeah, I mean, I think that it's a wonderful fictional device because it opens up the story to so many possibilities. It's such a flexible device. I'm really passionate about time travel fiction. I actually teach a class in it.
Oh
Um,
wow.
and there's a physicist named Ronald Mallet who wrote a nonfiction book about, I think it's called The Time Traveler, but it's about trying to invent a time machine so that he can go back and meet the father that he never really knew. And so it's been a long time since I read the book, but it's a really fascinating book that kind of illuminates some things about the theories around time travel. So I don't think he ever succeeded in his quest, but who knows, right? I mean, and
Who knows?
of course, we're all time travelers because we're all moving forward into the future. So,
Yeah,
and being a reader is like being a time traveler because
that's exactly right.
yeah.
I love it. We actually did radio plays that were time travel radio plays. And
Ah,
so and they're not they're completely hokey and hysterical because they're so hokey. But what we would do is we would take all the famous people that were born on that week or something. Like we had Lizzie Borden, we had Mae West meeting Amelia Earhart, and I mean all kinds. And so we were doing this where it was all audio. This is pre-Zoom time, and no one could see each other. And we would write the scripts according to actual quotes that these people said. So you would make the story. It was like these conversations, and some people would have like try and do a Julia Child accent, that didn't always work, but some did it well. So we'd all do our own accents, and we would travel up this time machine and meet all these people. It was kind of a trip.
yeah, true. Yeah, one of the really
Yeah,
fun
literally.
yeah, well, literally, yeah. One of the really fun things about time travel is that you can recreate historical moments and figures, but if you were just writing something that was purely historical, you wouldn't be able to shed a contemporary lens on it. And what I really love is that you
That's
can
a good
come
point.
at it with a contemporary perspective and you can make commentary on the differences between, say, women's roles then and now, or um,
Oh,
or customs then and now, or
even
any
in women in sports, right? Because
right,
that's another thing.
exactly.
Women in gymnasts, that's a whole other deal too. I
Yes.
mean, look back in if you're thinking in the 80s, how many women soccer players were there?
Mhm.
You know,
Well, and
so
and gymnastics is really fascinating because the ideal body type has changed over time, what we consider to be the ideal body type for gymnastics. And one thing that inspired me was that when my daughter was doing gymnastics, she and her friends would watch these videos of women in the 20s and 30s and 40s doing gymnastics and going, well, we could
wow.
do that because the skills were I mean, I'm sure that it was deceptive, that these people were much more skilled than the girls wanted to assume, but they were doing some really basic skills that most beginning gymnasts can do. And they were allowed to have real bodies. They had women's bodies. They had breasts. They had hips.
Oh, wow.
And you just don't see that in the same way anymore. Although you've seen this change to like the waif-like gymnast, and now it's kind of the powerhouse body, the really muscular, athletic body, which I think is probably an improvement from the the waif, the person who was just supposed to starve herself.
Wow, yeah. And I wonder if it's different. Is it the same for men?
No.
Of course not.
No, I don't even know. I haven't really done any kind of research on that, but I'm not even sure that the body type has changed substantially for men. Maybe it's more muscular now than it used to be for male gymnasts, but it's not as visible. It's not as, I mean, men's gymnastics didn't have to change the rules, but women's gymnastics did at one point. The Olympics, the rule is now that they have to turn like 16. I think the age, I may be getting this wrong, but the year that they're competing, I think it's that they have to turn 16, because we were having younger and younger and younger gymnasts, because these little light bodies just were able to do more. But now you look at people like Simone Biles, who is very strong and muscular and powerful. And so I think it's a really positive change.
It's interesting too, because it goes through with dancers and it's but gymnastics is really hard on your body.
Oh yeah. Oh, it is very much so. I mean, I don't know if I had to do it over, I'm not sure if I would encourage my daughter to get into it. And she, on her, I think it was her 18th birthday, she had some friends over for a little birthday party, and some of them were former gymnasts, and they all said, we wouldn't do it again. We're 18 years old and we have back problems. We have, joint problems. So it is even
At that age, that's because when they land, it's so hard. Like my uncle, he's passed now, but he was a state champion for California, gymnast and surfer, and so it kind of goes hand in hand with but he ended up being a gymnast. He made gymnastic gear, like the equipment and the bars and all of that, did all the padding for it, because I think it was part of it was how the wrong gear can hurt you.
Yeah. And I do think that certainly the equipment has changed substantially to protect, the gymnast, but it's still
Do you
hard.
think people reading this, the young adults reading this, are going to understand what, if you're not in sports, gives you an eye of the competitiveness and the mindset of what it takes to be in a sport? Because gymnasts, you're going to have friends and teams, but it's not like soccer or football where you have a team working together in a way, unless you're doing like a group event. You know what I mean? It's kind of solo in a way.
Yeah. And that was definitely something that I wanted to bring out, that, the teams, their scores are added up. So the team is always competing in say your typical YMCA gymnastics meet. But your individual scores are also really important. And so, and one thing that Elizabeth is discovering even more so as she gets older, as she gets into the age where girls tend to be a bit more catty and play games with each other. She's discovering that all these people that have always been her friends, because if you're a gymnast, you're in the gym all the time. So your friends are other gymnasts. It's an odd situation because they're the people you compete with, but they're also your best friends. And she's discovering those undercurrents of rivalry are becoming more and more problematic as she enters high school and is trying to navigate the social world.
I know, man. That's such a rough time. It really is. And then let's all, now you need to look towards going to college, and I think it's getting harder and harder for the younger generation. I think about what it was like when I was in high school, and I don't think we were as stressed as now,
Oh no. I mean, since I teach college, and some of my students are, they're 18 to 22 years old, and they are very stressed. And I definitely think the pandemic increased that a lot too. They were already very stressed, and now, there are more issues with just mental illness and learning issues, knowing how to be a student, you know, a lot of people lost a year of that, and it's really
Mm.
doing. So, but yeah, I feel like we are seeing substantial stress among young people in particular.
Would you think, since you teach writing, that writing can help with that? And,
Yeah, yeah, I'm a big advocate for that idea. In fact, I teach workshops sometimes in writing and healing, because there have been studies that show that writing about, like, it's not just writing about traumatic events, but writing about just whatever problems you're facing, and
Mm.
you know, proposing solutions on the page, or even like keeping a gratitude journal and writing about the things that you're grateful for, can really substantially affect your mental health and your outlook. And you know, there have been studies that show that college students who just
Mhm.
wrote for 10 minutes on a daily basis had fewer visits to the student health centers, had fewer health complaints in general, you know, just
So that's
performed and
cool.
functioned better. Yeah, yeah. So I think writing is an amazing tool for just coping, for coming to terms with issues.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And reading too. I mean, it's an
Oh,
escape. And so like writing young adult, it's like you have to have that balance of not being um, you know, learn your morals. You know, it shouldn't be like it should be something entertaining that you learn from without teaching a lesson. But you're sneaking it in there, right? It's like if you could eat a delicious cake and it's got your medicine in there and it worked. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah, you know, I mean, I think ultimately I agree with you that reading is very transformative, and that we learn values from reading, right?
Hmm.
I think that when you're writing for young adults, you want to be very careful to just represent real life as best you can, as opposed to, you don't want to preach, right? You don't want to,
That's exactly it. Yeah.
and so you know, it's just what the character discovers through her journey. You know, you don't want the adults coming in and saying, now here's what you've learned. You know, you want her to, you want it all to emerge from that character. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, it can
It's
be
a powerful tool. It really is,
yeah,
and it's entertaining. It maybe releases some stress too. I
it gives
think
you
reading
perspective.
does.
Yeah, yeah, it gives you
Hmm.
perspective on your own experience, because even if you're not a time traveling gymnast, we've all struggled with our identities. We've all struggled with
Hmm.
finding our place in the world, and so I think that the the conflicts that characters deal with always in some way tap into our own
What got you started in writing?
writing. Yeah,
Reading?
yeah, reading, yes, for sure. I remember writing my what I think was my very first story. I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and my dad we'd go to the public library, and I'd bring home stacks of books. And the first thing my dad had us do was write a list of the books that we checked out, because he wanted to be sure that when it was time to take them back, that we could, you know, we had everything. And so I was sitting there writing this list of books, and I just suddenly was seized by inspiration. I turned over the piece of paper and I started writing a story. I think I'd just been reading some British children's books. Excuse me. So my story was, you know, very British inspired
Oh, cool.
language, and so that's the first time I remember just like being so excited and just taking off. But I always wrote. I wrote throughout my childhood. I wrote stories. I wrote poetry, um, and you know, I was just overjoyed when I discovered that you could actually go to college and major in writing. I was, you know,
Yeah.
probably 16 when I discovered this. And I was like, oh, that's what I'm doing. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's just something
Back in
that,
the day, it used to be if you're a woman going to college, you're only going to go be a nurse,
yeah,
you
I thought
know?
I was gonna be a teacher. I thought, you know,
That's
because
it.
my mom was a teacher. So I thought, oh, that's
Yeah.
what I do. And one day I said, wait a minute, I don't have to be a teacher. I could be a
Yeah.
writer. But I always thought I'd probably end up teaching to support myself as
Well,
a,
you're doing both, right? And
that's what I'm
that's
doing.
magical. Well, I think you learn by teaching.
Yeah.
You're seeing how brains are reacting to information
Oh,
and how to
absolutely.
transfer the information over more effectively.
I don't even know if I would have tried to write this novel if it hadn't been for the many students that I've worked with over the years who are interested in speculative fiction.
Hmm.
And, you know, so I've read a lot of their efforts, and they've referred me to books, and, you know,
Oh,
lent me
that's cool.
books, And so, yeah, I mean, there is like this really wonderful thing that happens with teaching where you constantly are also stimulated and, getting
That,
information and ideas.
that's cool. So are you going to do another young adult book?
So I have a sequel to this book that is
Ooh.
sort of just in note form right now. I haven't really done any writing on it, but yeah, I have some pretty solid ideas for that.
Cool.
Yeah. And who knows what else down the road.
Yeah, who knows what happens when she goes down that time travel, you know. That's a rabbit hole in itself. It really is,
Oh, for
you
sure.
know. Well, we look at it like we do a lot of family history shows, and it- that is like the epitome of going through time travel
Oh, yeah.
and
Yeah.
having to understand what your family was like at a certain time and things that you may not agree with now, but that was the way life was then. It's very interesting, and I think it's a very real um, thing. And then when you start writing memoirs, and I know you've written memoir too, it's I think that's where the creative fiction comes in. And we talk about that even, obviously, we do so much travel is a huge part of what we do, and work with a lot of travel writers. And it's like, okay, let's take exactly, this is, nonfiction. How do we add that extra element in there to add some creativity in there? So another like creative non, I don't know if I just said creative fiction, but I meant creative nonfiction.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It just dawned on me. I was like, what did I just say? I think all fiction is supposed to be creative.
Right.
But
Right. But yeah, what you're saying, I mean, that's how I made the transition to creative nonfiction fairly easily, is that I was writing fiction throughout my 20s that was often very autobiographical. And when I discovered creative nonfiction, and I discovered, this genre where you're writing about real stuff, but you're bringing some of the devices of fiction. You're portraying scenes, you're recreating dialogue, you're thinking about story structure and, like, what are the conflicts I was facing and where did I change and how did I transform. So all of those, all the things I knew about fiction, I could transfer to creative nonfiction. And honestly, I think that the stories that I was trying to write just were more powerful if you knew that they were true. And so that's, why I switched to writing creative nonfiction. But I wouldn't say that the techniques I use are really that much different.
it's adding texture,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
taste and flavor, and you know what I mean? That kind of layered yeah, you draw people in with that. And it's I think it's important for nonfiction, unless you're reading a manual, but God, they can really jack up some manuals and make them fun. I mean,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
it's
Right.
like I remember we were doing a test tasting product, and it had a little little alcohol in there, and they go, it was like a seltzer kind of thing, and they did have one, you're smiling, then there was like a little smile, then two is like a big smile, and the third one they're like you're upside down or something. And it was just something funny inside these notes and packaging. And I think we're starting to break out of this typical
Yeah. Yeah.
graphic, like here's a graph that you have to read, or how do you put a bookshelf together? We all know the book doing the, like, can we make this more fun?
Right. Right. Well, it's all about voice, right? There was a voice in that instruction manual that you were reading.
Yeah.
And one thing I love about creative nonfiction is it's not the kind of dry research writing I was taught in high school. It's about getting your voice at the forefront. And it's actually something that helped me make the transition into writing fiction in first person, which I hadn't really tried to do. But once I had figured out that creative nonfiction voice, my own voice, it was much easier to inhabit characters. I published my first novel a few years ago called Following Disasters, and it was first person. And I didn't think I was ever going to take on first person. And then this Vaulting Through Time is also first person, and I have a forthcoming middle grade novel that is also first person. So
Wow.
and someday I'd like to get back to writing in other points of view too, but that really opened me up a lot.
Yeah, it gives people, it's kind of an intimate reading experience, when you have that. But I always find dialogue to be, that's hard to write dialogue. That's the hardest part,
Yeah.
It's like, and then then you have to do all the grammar, but that's nothing compared to
Oh, yeah.
yeah, we don't care about that stuff. It's it's
We
the
can
actual
bring that
meat of
later
a dialogue.
Yeah.
Yeah, dialogue is rough, but this is exciting what you've written. So before you go, any tips for anyone getting started in writing their first young adult novel? Since you're a teacher, and
Yeah.
a writer.
I think what really trips people up when in trying to write any book is that it just seems so big. There's so much that has to get done, and it can be really overwhelming and cause all sorts of mental blocks. And so I just suggest that people set the clock for 15 minutes and write for that amount of time, and then go do something else, see what happens. I tricked myself into writing books because I just basically said, okay, you just have to write for an hour a day. And if it's not going well, then you can just stop and you can go do something else. And what would often happen is I'd feel very resistant for about 45 minutes. In the last 15 minutes, it would just take off. And the next thing I knew, I'd look up and it had been 3 hours. So I think you can trick your mind into getting into that place where you can just write. But don't try to bite off too much at once, do a little bit at a time, do one little story, one little part, one little scene, because gradually they accrue, and you have a book.
That's awesome. Now, do you write in other locations? Because I know some writers, they'll go like to a coffee place or a library, or they'll even go book a bed and breakfast just to get away from the norm, to kind of jolt their brain and just get out of their comfort zone.
Because I was a single parent, I never really had the option of going to writers' retreats or, going to coffee shops, or, I was pretty much bound to the house for many years when I wasn't teaching. And so I think I trained myself to be able to write anywhere. So I can write. I mean, I write mostly at home, but if there's construction being done on my house, I can go somewhere else and write. Or if I'm traveling, I can usually write. So I think you just train your brain to kick in and to do the work.
So there it is. That's a lesson. Train your brain from Nancy. I like it. I like it. Everybody, the book Vaulting Through Time is out now by Nancy McCabe, and you can go to nancymccabe.net to connect with her and also follow up on other books as well. So looking forward to the next run of books from you. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's been fun talking to you.
You too. Everyone, of course, also bigblendradio.com. Thank you for listening.